Melinda hated night driving at night. She did her best to avoid it. Short trips to the store. If she just realized she ran out of tampons or had nothing for dinner after getting home. That sort of a thing that happened now and then. But she did her best to not go out after dark unless someone was coming to pick her up. So naturally she found herself on the longest drive of her night. With no moon, a few stars, swirling clouds above her, and acres of forest on either side. As so many unpleasant things in her life, this was her father's fault. She hadn't seen or spoken to the bastard in 15 years. But just after falling asleep tonight, no, that was wrong. It should have been yesterday by this time. Out of the blue, her phone rang, and his voice was on the other end. "I need you, Mealy. Come home now." He just said that, and then the line went dead. The old ass was probably drunk, but he never called her before. Not since she was a child, and he was still trying to convince her mother to take him back. It felt as if she had been dreaming, waking up to hear his voice again, after all these years. It sounded as if he was crying. His voice just sounded the same as the last time she heard it. As thought in the dream, she had risen, dressed, and gotten in the car. She was well out of her town and halfway to his old place, just before realizing that she had no way of knowing if he was still even lived there. She received updates from her mother from time to time over the years about where he was. The last time she heard her mother about him was 7 years ago. He had ever stayed in that place that long? Not to her recollection. She had been with 7 since her mother had finally had enough and showed him to the door. Prior to that, a move that came every few months. The house they had been living in was their longest stay in one place. A full 16 months. It turned out 2 years after that, and when the next house had been the one she left, when she moved out on her own, in all that time, she heard from him sporadically at best, and had decided it was best to simply forget about him. Until tonight. She had found out a 2-hour drive that she had been getting to right wonder if he was still in the same place. His last known address was sketchy apartment in a low-income area of the town where she had grown up in, and he had been number 24 or number 42. Maybe he was 14. It definitely had a 4. It didn't matter. His name wasn't on any of the buzzers. Bastard. Her drunk of a father called her that night, but all demanding she come to him for reasons he didn't even feel that were important, enough to tell her over the phone, and then just expected that she would know where he lived now. In a flurry of rage, she turned and marched back to her car, slamming the door and shutting off in the direction the way she came. She was so angry that she didn't even look to where she was going and missed her turnoff. The next thing she knew was that she was on the lonely stretch of road. The cars were sparse, and she took some comfort into the fact that she would pass one every half hour or so. Her dashboard clock now read 2:27 a.m. She had been driving for more than 5 hours since leaving her house at night. Every 5 minutes or so, she checked her cell phone. Ever since realizing she was lost, she had to check her phone and found no bars at all. She even stopped at a gas station, closed of course. Just sure there should have been some service around there, but nothing. Take a stock of your life, Mealy, she thought. You're over 30, you hate your job, and your mother don't get along. You haven't seen or spoken to your father in just half your life. You had no time for your friends or a relationship, thanks to a aforementioned job you hate. And now here you are, trapped on a road that you've never been on before at night. And you can't even so much as call AMA, let alone check Google Maps. Smart lady you are. She briefly considered stopping and flagging down the next car that passed. She quickly realized that the futility of the plan. Any car on this road would have also had no service. So there was nothing for it. She would have to drive until she saw a house. She felt bad for waking someone up, but there was no choice. She needed to find her way back to the main highway. But so far, all that she could see on the other side were trees, Mile of trees. No lights shining through the boughs. No sign that anyone had been there except for there was a road, and people were obviously still driving on it. There weren't even on signs on the road other than the mile markers. Had she really found the middle of nowhere? She was just in the middle of this thought of her headlights illuminated something just up the road. A square wooden sign, obviously made by someone not other than the government. This wasn't gas, food, or a lodging sign, or a mile marker, or distance to sign. This looked like some kind of signs advertising a private business was nearby. She slowed down to read it. Granny Royce Roadhouse. Come stay the night at Granny's. She'll take good care of you. Room, board, low prices. Next exit. Her heart sped up. She certainly wasn't sure if interested in spending the night at Granny's Royce, but every business had a phone. At that point, she would have a map or know the way back to the highway. She decided she would stop there. She almost missed the turn. Granny Royce's road was just buried in the back of the long dirt driveway, scheduled among the secluded around the midst of the trees. She was almost past the little dirt road that led back to it before realizing it was there. She skidded up to a stop and then turned in. The little house lay ahead. It was 2 stories and looked about 8 to 10 rooms. Big for a home, but small for anything announcing the room and board. She got closer and looked for a vacating sign. Nothing. It wasn't that sign, it wasn't lit. There was no sign. The porch light was on, and the front of the building was illuminated by the light by the headlights. No signs of any kind. She almost wondered if she had gone to the wrong place, but she was certain that she had seen none other than exits between his house and the sign announcing it. She paused in the driveway and took out her cell phone again. Still no service. She had a quick research for any available wireless signals. For her to complete the lack of surprise, there were none. Not even any secured. There was no one but me, she thought. At this point, she wouldn't be surprised to find the house empty as well. But the light was on, and this was supposed to be a roadhouse. Someone would be manning the front desk. She got out of the car and headed for the front porch. As she turned around to make sure that the lights flashed when she hit the lock button of her fob, she thought that she could see a flash of movement in the trees. Something human-shaped. She stopped and looked again. Nothing. She decided that she imagined it. At the front of the door, she hesitated. If it were really a roadhouse, then she would be able to just go in. But what if she got in the wrong house? If she tried the door and just walked in, she could find herself arrested out there, but in nowhere she was. Cautiously, she tried the knob, and it turned. She pressed gently on the door, and it opened. Relief flooded through her when she saw that she was in a small but tastefully decorated foyer that had obviously been repurposed as an admin's area. A quaint desk with an honest-to-God guest book that had been placed right in the far right corner, and some chairs had been set out, alongside the magazines on the table. She read the titles briefly. Mademoiselle Blue Book, The Country Life, Arts and Culture, right before turning her attention back to the little desk. There wasn't a computer. There was a cute torch, but it looked like the house had been from a past era. Perhaps old Granny Royce didn't really like modern technology. However, there was a little bell, just like there would be one in 1929. It wasn't even the round silver kind you slapped a ring. It was a little porcelain handbell. This place was starting to out-cute her. Please let her have a phone, and please let her use the number plan, not 50s exchanges. She picked up the bell and gave it a shake. For a while, nothing happened. And then she saw a light that came on in the back room, and a shadow of an old woman sprang up on the wall. The shadow moved towards her, and within a few seconds, she saw its owner, Granny Royce, who perhaps looked like every grandmother in every storybook ever. "Well, goodness me," she said. "My lands, good morning, dearie." Pardon my tartar lines, but it has been a while since we've got guests at this hour. Can I take your name, honey? Granny Royce was smallish. Her gray hair was tied in a neat bun behind her head, and her dress that would have been looked like it had belonged to a senior citizen in the 20s, and it faded to a pink sweater. Melinda thought that she looked like as if she could give her own grandmother to look like. But her mother's mother had died when she was young, and she had never met her father's mother. It almost hurt to deny this sweet little woman her business, but nevertheless she had to get home. Actually, I'm sorry, she said, but the facts is I'm lost and I'm not sure where I'm in the direction of. Oh, you poor thing, said Granny Royce. You just sit down and let me fix you some tea, or something. You must be cold. Really, thank you, but I'm okay, Melinda said gently. I just need to use the phone, or if I could, if you've got a map, even that would be lovely. I really only live a couple of hours from here. She trailed off, not knowing if she even said right about that. She could have easily have driven those 5+ hours in the wrong direction entirely. Oh dear, said the little woman sadly. I'm sorry, honey, but the phone lines are down. As for a map, well, I used to have one, and if I look, I still might, but it's probably out of date by now. The highway moved since then. I don't know that much. Melinda's heart sank. How could her luck get any worse? No phone, or cell or landline, and no map? What could she do? She had to get back home. She was expected back to work at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Why were the phone lines down? The weather was coldish but clear. Were they fixing a line nearby? She told Granny Royce the name of the town, but the granny said, Believe it or not, I have never heard of that town. What did you say the name was? She told her again. No, it doesn't ring the bell. I'm sorry, but I could not say which direction it's in. Why don't you stay for the night, sweetie, and I'll give you a discount for your trouble. Thank you. That's very kind of you. But I have work tomorrow and I need to get back home. I'm not even sure why I'm out tonight. The only reason I hadn't seemed to be matter anymore. Honey, I would have advised you trying to drive back to far at night, Granny Royce said. Why, it's almost 3 a.m, and you have not any sleep. Maybe the lines will be up in the morning, and you can call your work tomorrow and let them know you'll be late. That won't work either, she replied. I'm the opener and no one will be there. No, I'm sorry. I've really got to leave. I'll head in the other direction till I find the road I was on. After that, Granny Roy's expression, already one of concern, seemed to shift somewhat to one of fear. She paused looking at Melinda, as if though she wanted to say something else to keep her inside. Finally, she said reluctantly, All right, honey, if you're sure. Just be careful now. Don't speak to nobody until you're back on the road. The last warning seemed a little silly. After all, what was Melinda, a little girl? She thanked Granny Royce for her kindness and headed back to the car. About halfway to the car, she remembered thinking she saw something moving in the trees. Her eyes both scanned the sides of the secluded little cleared area, and she was now looking for anything that appeared to be moving on its own, rather than being blown by the slight wind. She saw nothing. Satisfied, she headed for the car. All 4 tires were flat. God damn it! She leaned down and saw a long slash of marks on each tire. Someone in this little slice of Green Acres had slashed her tires in time to look for her, to find out that she had no way of contacting anyone tonight. Kids from a local farmhouse had gotta be, she thought grimly. Nothing else to do, so you might as well go out at night and slash tires. She stopped and let the reality sink in. She wasn't going anywhere tonight. She had no choice. Now she had to stay here for the night until morning. When the phone lines would be up, she could call someone from work and tell them to go and ask them to go in for her. And then the AMA would get to the tires they're dealt with. She sighed and walked back into the house. She could hear Granny Royce as if she was walking back to her room. She had already turned off the lights, resigned to her fate. Melinda rang the bell again. That you, miss? She heard Granny Royce call. Yes, it's me, she answered. Sorry to be a bother. My name is Melinda Orton. Sorry I never mentioned it before. I guess I'll take a room for a night, if the offer's still good." "Oh, of course it is, dearie," said Granny Royce, re-entering the room and turning on the lights back on. "Melinda, oh, that's such a pretty name. Honey, well, let's get you suited. Did and situated. You may put your name and arrival time on the book, and I'll get you a key. All the boarding rooms are on the second floor, and there is only a couple left." "There are others here?" This was surprising. Not a single car had been in the front of the lawn since she pulled in. "Oh, yes, Miss Melinda." Granny was puttering around the adjacent room. "Mr. Norris, young Calvin, there's a few of us here." She came back with the key in hand. "Just out of curiosity, what made you change your mind?" She seemed to be as brightened as the question, as if she was relieved that Melinda would stay after all. "Oh, it's probably just local kids getting kicks," she said, "but I found my tires slashed." Granny stopped suddenly, and her face twisted with concern and worried. Then she assumed as though if something or nothing was wrong. "Nothing to be done for it, I suppose," she said with an air of sadness. "Well, not until morning at any rate," said Melinda. "Then hopefully the lines will be up." "Oh," Granny Royce said distractedly. "Yes, hopefully." She led Melinda up to the darkened staircase to an empty, quiet hall, or perhaps not so quiet. From one end of the hall she came a muffled sound of someone crying. Whoever it was crying softly, not with anger or petulance or fear, but with deep sadness. It sounded as if the crying was something that this person was used to, but they were still unable to stop. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing at the direction where the crying was coming from. "Oh, pay no mind, honey," said Granny. "That's just Mr. Norris. He's been like that for a while. Older man, you understand. Not there at all." She tapped her temple. "I understand," Melinda replied, but wondered privately how an old out-of-touch man would wind up in a roadhouse. "Has he been there long?" A while, I'd say," answered Granny. "Don't really recall how long exactly." "How does he pay for a room and a board?" "I guess he doesn't drive," she said to the older woman. "Actually, it doesn't look like anyone else here has a car." Granny stared at this, looking up with almost guilty expression. "Oh well," she said, "that kind of thing is the business of the guests. I don't ask such things." She turned the key in the lock of the room and led Melinda into and opened the door. Turning the light, she showed Melinda the quaint little room. Melinda thought so. It looked as if stepping into the past. She could swear this room would have had like modern early 50s, at the earliest. Come to think of it, so could the rest of this place, she thought. No wireless service, no computer, that old bell, and those magazines look new, but... That thought was caught off by Granny, as she put the key on the nightstand and started with the instructions. "Now, the bathroom is down the hallway there. You'll be sharing this whole floor, so please bear that if you have to go, there is a shower schedule on the door. As well, first come, first serve. You just have to add your name to the first available line, and that'll be in order to get the showers are in. I wouldn't worry about that if I were you. I'm sure you'll be first in line. I get up at 6 a.m. every sharp in the morning and start breakfast. But you can come down whenever you're ready, and I'll whip up something for you. Oh, and one last thing, dear. I would strongly advise you not to leave the house until sunup. Just you never know what could ever happen in the dark." "Of course," she replied. "I never go out there in the dark, if I didn't have to." She stopped at the train of thought right out of the gate. After a few moments, she was alone. Alone without anything to wear to bed, and nothing to shower, brush, or her teeth, or her hair in the morning. She just sat on her bed and looked at the window, with face to front. Her car was still sat where she had left it. The only thing for miles it seemed like part of her world. And an expensive overlarge paperweight until I can get a hold of someone, she thought bitterly. Despite the homeliness of the room, she felt unwillingness rise and shut off the light. Somehow the thought of her going to sleep was a little backward in the little room seemed unthinkable. So instead she continued to sit and stare at the window. A figure in the black detached itself from the shadows of the trees that made its way to the car. The hell? She jumped down and ran out the window. The figure was tall, and it seemed to be wearing a cloak made out of night. She saw its arms extended, and its hand was long, jagged, and dagger. It dragged the dagger across the side of her car, leaving a long gash mark in the paint and metal. "Hey!" she shouted. The figure kept dragging the dagger. She reached for the window to open it, but it wouldn't budge. She looked for a lock, but couldn't see one. "Hey!" she yelled again. This time the figure raised its head. She could see a glint of 2 years under the hood. The figure raised the dagger slowly, determinedly. It pointed straight at her face. She leapt away from the window and ran for the door. A noise on the other side stopped her. Footsteps, dragging, shambling footsteps, and crying. The sound of a person whom deep, longing sadness way of life. "Mr. Norris!" She waited. Somehow she just lifted that it would let the old man pass before she opened the door. Before he got very far. However, she heard other footsteps. These are much quicker and lighter. Run up the stairs and stop near the door of her room. "Stop it!" hissed Granny Royce. "Go back in your room right now. You better. She can't see you yet. Hopefully, she won't have to at all. Now go back in there. You've got no business being out at this hour." What on earth? How could that sweet old woman talk to another human that way, let alone an old man with a foggy mind? She almost opened the door right then, but somehow her hand stopped and she waited, shuffling, crying, and man, he made his way back and down to the hallway. She heard the door open, and then she opened the door just in time to see his foot, showed in a well-worn house shoe, slide into his room. The door closed softly after him. That poor man, she thought. But now she was determined to figure out what was going on. The punk outside of the Halloween costume slashing up her car, followed by Granny yelling at the old man, to make her begin to understand that was all not was well up there. She went back down to the front desk area, to which it was completely unlit, except for the moonlight and porch light coming through the window. There was, however, on a near back of the room was Granny Royce had emerged from before. Melinda paused to take a quick look outside the front window. The maniac with the dagger was nowhere to be seen for a moment, but she was now determined that was he the one moving she was seen move in the trees? He could have killed me. She strode in the direction of the light, seeing that it was a light to the kitchen. She kept going, expecting to find Granny Royce still puttering about whatever the old innkeeper did with herself during the early hours of the morning. Instead, she found Granny sitting on the young man, about 20. He had dark hair and scruff or stubble, and he was wearing a dark brown corduroy shirt and tighties, along with the pork pie hat. He looked as if he was ready to go sell newspapers on a street corner in the 30s. He was quietly sipping a tea, while Granny was admonishing him at the other end of the table. "Now, that was a horrible thing to say," she said. "When I was your age, young men minded their manners." "That's a laugh talking about my age," muttered the young woman with a sneer. "And how old are you? Do you even remember?" "Calvin Davidson. You are in trouble, young man," she hissed back. "Neither you had noticed Melinda yet? One of these days, you are going to say something you'll regret." "Oh, come on, Granny. What could I have possibly said that will make things even worse than they already are?" demanded Calvin. "I mean, look at Mr. Norris up there. Both of us are. Oh, hello, miss. I didn't know we had anyone else here." He had just seen Melinda. Hi," she said. She had a feeling that she had walked into an old argument of the two of them, and she had many times, and that did not concern her. Her fear and anger were forgotten at the moment. Calvin had been talking to Granny like a sullen kid, but something about what they were saying seemed wrong. "Can I help you, Melinda?" asked Granny Royce. "Is there anything wrong with your room?" That brought her back. No, she said. The room's fine, but nothing else is. I mean, what on earth do you even have a roadhouse out to where what seems like no one ever stops? Why is most of the rooms full, and even though mine is only the car out there? Why did I hear you talking to Mr. Norris like he was a dog? And why would you even make sure I didn't see him? She got no further before Calvin cut her off. Good Lord, she's not even been there at night that she can see it. Why did we even let her in, Granny? Why didn't you bolt the door? Hell, if I could go take down that sign, don't you think I would have by now? Lord love a duck. There was something you don't hear many young men said, thought Melinda. She thought she could ignore Calvin for the moment otherwise. And besides that, there is someone out there. He's a freak who slashed my tires and has been out there messing up my car since then. And you can't even call the police? Are you going to tell me that you've never had vandals out there before? There was a long pause in the room. Neither Granny or Calvin seemed willingly to break it. Calvin scratched his neck. For the first time, Melinda noticed a red slash at his throat, half hidden by his collar. It looked as if a very fresh scar or a lightly healed wound. Listen, miss, I don't know your name, he finally said. Melinda, she told him. Melinda, he repeated. Melinda, I think you should sit down. I have to tell you something that you may find troubling. Melinda did not like how he said that. She also didn't like the way his tone had switched from sullen child to a serious adult. He looked several years like her junior, but she was talking to her like he was her uncle or her boss. He swallowed a sip of tea and sighed. Then he looked straight in the face and said, The reason why I don't have a car out there is that when I got here, no one my age, no one in my line of work could have owned a car. It would have seemed like an impossible dream. What? What are you talking about? She asked hesitantly. I worked in a textile mill, he said. The mill was shut down by the time I got there. Most business were, so I struck out here on my own, drifter looking for the work I could find. And I stopped there forever. Businesses were shut down. I don't understand, said Melinda. We were having a rough time of it right now, but businesses are mostly staying open. Not then, they weren't, said Calvin, sadly. I arrived here in 1929. Melinda blinked. Something exploded before her eyes. This place was new then, said Granny. My man and I had just opened it. A young Mr. Calvin was a sweet lad of 16. I offered to take him and hired as his help over my husband's objections. As well as my husband was a well-meaning man, but he knew how to pinch a penny. 'Twas the year after I took Calvin on that Mr. Royce died. Calvin and I have been here ever since, and every 3 years or so, someone would join us. Yep, Calvin broke in. Miss Tilly was the first. She was a woman of ill repute who ran here, pregnant and scared, and that the man who would run her up to trade her up in New York was going to find her and kill her. She and that baby. He broke off, now seemingly at the point of tears. And then, said Granny, that was Mr. Standish. He was traveling, He doesn't travel anymore. Mr. Norris got here in 69, said Calvin. His story was probably the worst. He was a bank robber, you see, carried a pistol, and he didn't like learning as long as we all been here. He paused, stood up and walked to the kitchen window. He tried to leave on his own. You see, he ain't the first to try it. That was me, actually. I warned him not to try, but he wouldn't listen. But when he got outside and he finally met him. Calvin! Hissed Granny. We don't talk about this. She's gotta know, said Calvin. There's no point on her finding out slowly. There is still a chance for her, said Granny in a stage of whisper. All she has to do is wait until morning. She's not going to be waiting until morning, said Calvin with some remorse in his voice. No one ever waits until morning. The fact that she came down here was proof enough, at least, of that. Besides, what good would that really have done to her? Her car is useless. We have no phones here, and there was no phone when this place went up, and won't ever be a phone here, you know that? Okay, everyone stop, Melinda shouted. That's enough. Now you can't keep me prisoner here, and I have no intention of staying in there any longer. Oh, and that knife-wielding maniac is out there is keeping me from running up the road in this minute. Now, I need to know what the hell is really going on here, and I need to know it now. We've been telling you, Calvin said. Granny may not want you to know everything, but you need to know because you won't be leaving. Oh, and we're not trying to keep you prisoner. I don't even care if you run out of that door right now, but you'll never leave this house again afterwards. Like hell I won't, yelled Melinda. Listen, child, said Granny, rising from her spot on the table. Listen to me, please. None of us mean you any harm, my dear. Not even Mr. Norris. There is a scant he can't do anymore, and he knows it. That's why he's up there crying all the time. We've been stuck here, all of us. Hoped that there was a chance for you to make a run for it in the morning. But Calvin's right. There's no guarantee you'd be safe in the morning anyhow. What the hell is wrong with this place? Choked out Melinda. She was beginning to break down. She could feel the tears swelling in her eyes. It was about a month after Mr. Royce died, said Calvin. When he came, he was wearing that long black robe and carrying that ridiculous dagger. I saw him when he was trimming the hedges in the back. I told him that he needed to get out of there because I didn't like his look. He moved so fast, I never saw it coming, and he got to me from here. Calvin touched around his neck. To here. He touched his lower abdomen, the opposite side from the neck slash, and he began to undo his shirt. Melinda almost vomited. Under his shirt was a very long, ugly gash that went in deep and was still seeping blood. She could see bone, muscle, and intestines wriggling out, and that managed ruin. I died that night, said Calvin.